Welcome to the Power of One. Today, I am going to be speaking to Nicole, and we're going to speak about mental illness and how it can affect someone's family. And unfortunately, Nicole's father suffered from mental illness on October 28th of 2024. He murdered his brother, and then he turned the gun on himself and shot himself. But Nicole is going to tell us about mental illness and how it has been a part of their family and even affected her for years. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for asking. And Nicole, I thank you so much for being on the show. Like, we have professionals all the time that are on the show, but I think you will be able to help so many people who are going through because it's lived experience and it's peer support, which I think is so important. So Nicole, tell us about where you grew up, in your household. How was daddy? Tell us all about, and are you a daddy's girl?
So I am a daddy's girl. I was raised with my mother and father who were married um, up until the age of 12 when my mom and dad got a divorce. So I grew up in Hawaii, Honolulu, and Fort Ord, California, which is no longer in existence. Um, my mom and dad were married. They had two children, myself and my brother. My brother is also deceased. And I grew up in a loving environment in the beginning. My dad was
Mm.
very, like, I was the daddy's girl. I was always with my dad. I was the only girl, so I was the oldest. I was the favorite. We lived in Hawaii up until I was 5 years old, and then he got his orders to go to Fort Ord, California, and then we wound up moving to Fort Ord, California. So I was born in Philadelphia, and then my mom and him moved to Honolulu, and then from 0 to about 5, we lived in Honolulu, and then we moved to Fort Ord, California, until I was about 12 years old.
Your dad
So
was in one of the branches of the military?
so my dad was in the Army and my mom was in the Navy. So after my mom had me, she wound up getting out the Navy, and then they moved to Fort Ord, California, because they were both stationed in Honolulu. So, it was adventurous. We lived in a multicultural community. It was a loving environment. My dad and my mom, from what I understood then, they were in love. And then somewhere down the line, something happened. So my mom has discussed with me as I got older that my dad has always had mental health issues. And we noticed some things, when I was younger. There were a few incidents between him and my mom, but I was a child. So, you'd be like, oh, well, that's just a regular argument. But sometimes it would be so extreme, you could tell it wasn't a regular argument. And now, as we get older, because a lot of people don't talk about the things that go on in the house, they just chop it up to, oh, that was just them fighting. No, there was a mental health issue that was never addressed. So apparently, my dad had PTSD from doing multiple tours. Um, in Vietnam in the war. He was in the service from 1969 until 1990. So he was
Mm.
diagnosed after doing multiple tours in Vietnam, as well as going other places. He was in Korea. He went to Hawaii. He's been to Germany. He's been all over the country. So he was a frontline medic. So just seeing how he was when he was home, he was always to himself. He loved music. Like, he loved music. He always played music. He loved family gatherings. He loved to be with family, but he had his moments when he needed to isolate himself and be by himself.
So
So
he knew when it was time, like you said, to isolate himself. Like, okay, I probably feel something going on, but at the time the family didn't know that's why.
the family didn't know. My mom had mentioned to me, as I'm 49. So she mentioned to me when I came back from California, that she said, well, I used to have to sleep with my gun because your dad would wake up from having tremors from him being in Vietnam. So I don't know what he saw. And I mean, he's talked about it from time to time to my sons and to
Mhm.
myself. but I don't think we took it as seriously to think that it would cause what has taken place,
Mm. Now,
cause children what has taken place.
the branch, you said he was in the
Army.
army. Did they
Yeah.
provide services, mental health services for your dad?
So this is the thing. Um, they provided some services. My dad was back and forth with behavioral health specialists all his life. He first got diagnosed, I believe in 1973. That was before I was born. I wasn't born
Mhm.
until 75. So apparently he's had numerous bouts with mental health issues on top of childhood trauma that he experienced.
Mhm.
So apparently there's a generational cycle of mental illness in the family that stemmed from his mother. And it was just passed down to the generations. And apparently, I guess that was one of the reasons why he enlisted. He enlisted in the service. He was a National Guard first. He enlisted in the National Guards at 17 years old.
Mhm.
And then he went and he enlisted multiple tours, multiple times into the Army. So I believe it stemmed from that. And then as a frontline medic, only God knows what he has saw,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what he was ordered to do. And he used to tell stories about the trauma that Vietnam caused him in his mind.
Mhm.
So, top of the chemicals that they sprayed on him, the Agent Orange, and all of those things, and the chemicals that affect not only him as an adult, but his seeds, his daughter, myself, and my brother, who is deceased. So, it's a lot to unpack, but we don't talk about that because people don't, if you're not a healthcare professional or if you're not licensed, they don't want to hear the truth about the mental
Mhm.
health and how it affects the families
Yeah.
generationally. They don't want to talk about that.
How did it affect you? And did your parents getting a divorce affect you? Did you go through any mental illness?
Oh, absolutely. When my mom, so us living in California, we went from a multicultural community to come to Philadelphia to live in the middle of Germantown. So all Black community. That was a reality check for myself. When we moved, my brother was only 2 years old. So it was a culture shock for me because I grew up around multicultural. So when we got to Philly, it was like, oh, if you're not wearing the latest brands of this and even way back then, if you're not wearing, the highest name glasses or, designer stuff, then you didn't fit in. And because they said I was too proper, or I had an accent from California. I always thought I was better. I thought I was white. That's what they say to Black people who have a
Mhm.
language,
I
who
got
have
the same thing. Yeah.
vocabulary.
Mhm.
They said, "Oh, you think you white," and I never thought I was white. It was just that I had a vocabulary, and I never thought I was better than anybody. I always knew who I was. It was just a culture shock for me because Philadelphia was so segregated. You had Black people here, you had Italians here, you had Irish
Mhm.
there,
Mhm.
Cambodian there, and it was hard for me to kind of fit in with the norm, living
Mhm.
in Germantown, coming from California to Shelton and Morton.
Mhm. Mhm.
That was
Yeah.
a reality check. And it was like, wait a minute, what is this? And because I was different, the kids bullied me. So it caused a lot of issues with me trying to get acclimated with the community and the culture at the time. So, I had a lot of difficulties with just trying to fit in on top of trauma that has been caused because mom and dad was divorced. And I didn't understand. And as
Mhm.
children, we don't understand, but we have
Sure.
to realize moving forward that divorce affects the family. Not only does it affect the two people that are making the decision to get a divorce, but it
Mhm.
affects the children who are involved in the divorce because now something that was two that became one is now two again. But you have these children where you came together and made that are affected by the decisions that you make. And when
Mhm.
people are not willing to work at it, it affects the whole dynamic of how the children grow, especially if you have multiple children in the relationship.
I agree, and I want to say this to you. So I was born and raised in West Oak Lane, and resided in West Oak Lane most of my life. And one of
Mm-hmm.
my neighbors used to always tell me, "Oh, you talk so proper. You think you're white." So I
What does
wasn't
that
talking
mean?
proper, but because I wasn't using slang, I was talking white. What does that mean? Does that mean that African Americans are not educated and we can't use correct words in a sentence? But she used to always say that to me, and it would upset me. So I can relate to that. So a couple of months ago,
Mm-hmm.
the most horrific thing. Well, not gonna say that because viewers, this is a two-part series here for this strong woman that's before me.
It's only
One of
God.
one of the most horrific things happened to you where you received a call in October. Tell the
Mhm.
viewers about that.
So on 10/29, I received a call that my father had killed himself. Not only did he kill himself, but he shot his brother in the head and then he proceeded to call 911 and he shot himself in the head as well. So it was a shock.
Mm,
And the backdrop is I'm a pastor. So backdrop is the day before I was praying and I was asking God to break generational curses because my oldest son had been checked into a mental ward the week prior. And I had called my father and asked him, like, Dad, what do you think about this? This is what took place with my oldest son. I've been praying, but what do I do? And my dad gave me a rundown of what to take and what not to expect and to just give him some peace and let him tell him to get sober. Like my dad was giving me a step-by-step guide as to what to do and how to handle my son who was having a mental break. And so I couldn't understand when they called. Um, I couldn't understand when they called that my dad had killed himself because he had just told me what to do for my own son, his grandson, the week prior. So to get the call, I was in shock. And the coroner's office called and said, "When was the last time you talked to your dad?" I said, "I talked to him last week." She's like, "I'm sorry to tell you, but your father is dead." And I said, "What do you mean? I just talked to him last week." And so she was like, "Well, it was an incident." And then I said, "I'm not understanding." So I said, she's like, "You need to hurry up and get here. You have to come and secure his house." So I made my way there. My birthday was November 2nd. I got on the plane November 2nd. I got there November 3rd. And then I had to go to Bakersfield to not even get a body because we still don't have a body. And that's a whole nother story. But I had to go to Bakersfield to secure my dad's property, only to get there to clean up a murder suicide scene from my dad who suffered from PTSD. Now, the story is he walked 10 miles from a hospital after being admitted for a contusion on his head and in a mental altered state. However, he went to the neighbors. He was outside of his house for 2 hours waiting to get in while my uncle was inside. Apparently, my uncle was inside the property and he was high. He used meth. It was what it was. And he didn't let my dad in the house. And my dad was very upset. And in him being upset, apparently, when he got in the house, I don't know if he shot him in the head that night or the day after. I'm not sure. That was on the 28th. And yeah, they called me. So I went there and I had to clean up a murder suicide scene from my uncle and my dad being shot in the head.
okay, so um, my dad is a pastor, so
Mhm,
I do everything in decency and order, and I don't talk bad about anybody. But I want
mhm.
to ask the question, and I'm not sure how to ask this question. But why would you have to clean up a murder suicide crime scene when there are victim services available?
So when I got to California and I reached out to the VA and to other services. Nobody knew nothing. I went in blind. So there's something that I go by called blind faith. And when I got there, I was like, I need to get there. It was during the election time, so nobody was really trying to move or do anything, honestly. Um, and it was just a lot of chaos. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, I had called her. She said, Mom, I'm coming out to where you are. You can't be out there by yourself. And so my whole mindset was this stuff has to get up before my child get here because I don't want her to be in shock like I was in shock. Like when I first got to the house, I arrived in Bakersfield on the 3rd. I went in the house on the 4th when the sheriff office had to escort me into the house because I didn't know what I was walking into, only
Mhm.
to see a sofa full of brain matter and to see a bedroom full of blood. Like my dad was OCD. So however he shot my uncle and himself, he was very strategic because the blood was in a specific place. And something about people who have OCD, PTSD, any type of developmental delays or disorders or any type of like obsession, compulsive disorders, they do things in a strategic manner. So whatever took place, however my dad shot my uncle, he shot him in the head and all the blood was designated to the sofa, like right in the contained space. And so apparently he called 911 and said, Peter's gone. And then they heard a pow. So the neighborhood evacuated, the cops evacuated the neighborhood and they went into the house. They had drones come over and I guess they saw the two bodies that were dead in the house and they bust into my dad's house. And that's how they found him and my uncle in the sofa in the bed, shot in the head. So when you call different services, if your name is not as next to kin, or if the person who has left this earth has not set up their proper arrangements, you can't get any information and or services. So that is why I had to clean up the murder scene. My daughter was coming into town and I did not want her to see that. So me cleaning up brain matter from my uncle and my father will change perspective. And it has changed perspective because I didn't seen too much now. And, going through that and experiencing that because he walked, as the neighbors told me, he walked 10 miles from being released from the hospital. So apparently he left the hospital with no shoes on his feet. He walked 10 miles.
So did he went to a mental institution? Is it the day before or that day?
So he went to the hospital on the 26th of October and he left on the 28th, and they didn't know that he left until the 29th. I got the notice in the mail because I had his key to the house on the 4th. Oh, Mr. Austin, you left the hospital against our will. We need you to call us right away. Well, why didn't you call the VA? Because in the paperwork that he gave to all of his neighbors, that was just sent to me yesterday from the sheriff office. They were supposed to call the VA hospital in Los Angeles for them to get him if he was in a mental altered state.
Mm.
And they never called the VA hospital after admitting him to the hospital. They just let him be there and they didn't do the proper protocol. So, with them not doing the proper protocol, it's a problem because he told them this is what's taking place. I'm having a mental break. And it says it in the paperwork that they gave me that just came in the mail yesterday. In the event, because I'm a disabled veteran, that something happens, you are to call the VA hospital in Los Angeles and have me drove there or air vac there. And the hospital did not follow protocol, even to the point when the neighbors called the ambulance and they called the sheriff department. They turned this paperwork over to the Kern County Sheriff's Office and they turned this paperwork over to the EMTs who came, and they did not read the paperwork. Even though the neighbor told them he's not in his proper mental state, this is not him. They just allow him to go in the house. And then
And that
him
was on
going
the
in the house,
28th.
that was on the 28th, and he went in the house, and this is what took place because they did not read the paperwork that he gave to his neighbors that he entrusted. with this documentation.
And
And
as a
so
result,
as a
your
result, there,
uncle, his brother, lost
yes,
his life and your father took his life.
right. That's right.
Mm,
So we have two family members in the same family, an older brother and a bigger brother, who both had mental health issues because, people like, oh, well, your uncle was doing his thing too. My uncle apparently, the story was from the neighbors that my uncle was very abusive to my father. Well, it was my father's house, and he was always taught to take care of his siblings, his baby brother, his baby sister. He was always taught that. And so you know, seeing how things took place, I believe, because I don't know, I believe my dad was fed up. And talking to other family members, they said, yeah, we didn't know why Keith let Peter come there anyway, because we knew that was going to get tired because we know how Peter is and we know how Keith is, and Keith likes his space. However, my dad tried to provide for his baby brother that was 64. My dad was 72 years old. And so, at a point that you are 72 years old, suffering in pain, struggling with this
mhm,
debilitating PTSD, on top of your body is breaking down, all these other things are taking place, and you make a conscious decision or unconscious decision because it's mental health. He wasn't in
mhm.
his right mind to
Right.
shoot your brother and yourself. We have to do better as a society, as a community, as mental health professionals to just take it on the butt like, oh no, that's nothing. When I called the behavioral health specialist card that was on my dad's desk when I got there, I
Mhm,
said, this is Nicole Austin. I'm calling in reference to Keith Austin. He killed himself. The behavioral health specialist hung up on me. And then she called me back and she said, oh my God, did he kill his brother too? I said he did. And then she hung up the phone again. And then her supervisor called and said, we're not advised to give you any information because he never put you on his stuff. Because of HIPAA law, they're not allowed to share information about a mental health patient unless the mental health patient, which makes no sense to me, gives authorization for them to talk to next of kin to let them know what's going on. We need to change some policies and procedures.
that right there is disgusting. There's no other way to sit. That's horrible.
And so at the point that the supervisor called and said, oh, well, we're closing his case and we can't give you any information. And then she hung up the phone. And so, as a daughter coming in who has no information at all, I don't have a list of passwords or usernames, I don't have PIN numbers, I didn't have anything. That my dad never gave me the information. Never. And I'm the only child. He never gave me the information as to what to do. There was no living will. There was a copy of a draft of something, but even with that, because he never registered it, it doesn't mean anything.
Right,
And
right,
so it was a lot of missing pieces. And as an older person, especially for our people, not to be like a
mhm,
black or white thing, but for our
right,
people, we're so ignorant in so many areas, it makes no sense. And ignorant meaning we will not do the necessary paperwork that needs to be done. We're not handling our business like we need to handle it as a society. And
mhm,
everybody has all these secrets. Like, let go
mhm,
of the secrets and be honest. If there's a mental
right,
health issue in that person, then we need to address this, because if I see something coming up in my children or my grandchildren, I want to know. If there's something
exactly.
that comes up with me, and like you asked me earlier, did I have my own mental health battles? I did. Because when you have parents that divorce, you feel immediate abandonment and rejection. And then that
Mm,
abandonment and rejection come in. And when you have two parents that are unstable or have addictive behavior, my dad was an alcoholic because he was trying to comatose his feeling of the PTSD. So when he drank alcohol, he felt like he was in his own state of a different state of mind where he could cope. My mom had her own addiction, which was gambling. Like, if we be honest, if you go to counseling, you were ostracized because only white people, as we were taught, I'm 49, so I can say it, were taught to go to counseling. If you went to counseling as a black person, you was deemed crazy. Well, so what?
mhm,
because I believe in Christ and counseling. As the
Right.
pastor, I believe in Christ and counseling. And there's some things that prayer can get out, but there's some things that you might need a mental health professional to really help you navigate through the quality of life. So you're not
I got
killing
one last question,
yourself.
and we don't have much time.
Okay.
Did you ever try to commit suicide?
When I was 14, I got raped. And it triggered a lot of things that had happened to me from me being molested as a young child, being in different spaces and places, because, like I said, my parents both had addictive behavior. So when they were finding different babysitters and things, um, they would send me different places. And we wonder why children are operating the way they operate and who touched them. Why is the child acting promiscuous? Why is the child catered to one sexuality than the next who touched them inappropriately? So I'll say that. And at 14, I tried to kill myself by overdosing on some pills that I had got, and I had to get my stomach pumped with charcoal. And with that, that was the reality check for me where, you know, God stepped in and let me know that this was not my choice. Like, you don't have that right to take your own life. And that's the only
Mm,
reason why it was a failed attempt at
mhm,
suicide, not knowing what the history was prior to me being a
mhm,
14-year-old child. Now, as I look back, when I minister to young people, I tell them, if you feeling this, go get the help that you need. Don't be afraid to
mhm,
get the help. Don't be afraid to go and reach out. Now that we
mhm,
have 988, I thank God that they have lines that people can call to get
mhm,
the proper mental health help that is needed. However, mental health professionals, stop just discounting the
mhm.
people and what they're saying. If you're not there, if you're there just for a check, then find another job. But if you're there because you really want to help and care for the people, then do your due diligence on the clients that are coming to you and don't take it lightly. And please be careful of who you discuss each person's case with, because you don't know who knows who.
That's so true. I thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing this story and for your strength, because this is rather new, but I do think you're going to help so many people. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Anytime. God bless you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. What a hard story to listen to. And we've learned so much. One, family members, if you know your family member has a mental illness, seek help. Do not sweep it under the rug, because it's not going to go away. And those of you, the mental health providers, please be very sensitive and be empathetic to those that you are serving, and make sure they get all of the services that they need and require. Peace and love.